Good morning all. Today we are going to discuss about API management, and by using API management feature we are going to manage and secure our APIs with policies, and also we will manage the client based access. And before discussing about the API management policies, first we will deploy our suppliers API and then we will test it from the Postman. Application is deployed. Now I am going to send a request. So whenever we are sending a request with the details like parameters and also headers, then we are receiving the response. But if we observe here, we are sending a client ID and client secret, which are a dynamic or some random values. Like for example, I am sending 345 and then 567. Then also we are getting a response from the service. Likewise, we have post supplier, create supplier operation. And here also we can send any of the details, client ID and client secret. Just the keys are necessary, or we have to send this client ID and client secret which are of mandatory as a headers. But it is being not validated within the service. So we need to make sure that whenever we are implementing a service or developing a service or API, we have to provide a security for our APIs. For that purpose, we need to apply some rules on the APIs so that whenever a consumer is going to send a request to the API, then it needs to be validated against that rule and it needs to throw some error whenever the details are not matching. So, in order to apply the rules and all, first we need to know what are the policies and how can we apply policies. So, what are policies? Policy is a regulation or a rule that we need to follow, and it will be applicable to APIs as well. And within Mulesoft API management, we have different types of policies, and those are divided based on the usage. And these are categorized as security policies, quality of service policies, compliance, and troubleshooting. And we can see that how can we apply the policies and what are the contracts as part of the session. And also we will discuss about what are the SLA types and what is auto discovery. So log into AnyPoint platform, and within AnyPoint platform on the main menu, go to API manager. Here choose environment. So once you select the environment, here within the environment we have to register or add an API. So to add a API, select add API and then add new API. Here we have to choose the gateway. So we can choose Mule gateway or Flex gateway and also service mesh. It is like a custom and on-premise gateway. Choose Mule gateway, and here we have to select the proxy type. It is a basic endpoint, and also our Mule version is Mule 4. Click on next, and here we have to choose an API. Either we want to create a new API, or if we wanted to select an existing asset or API from the exchange. Since in our previous sessions we have created API specification, and also that API specification is published to AnyPoint exchange, we can select the asset from AnyPoint exchange. Here search for the APIs. If we have multiple, you can search for the API that we wanted to register or add in the API management. So select the API, and here we need to select the API version. For example, if it is having multiple versions, then we need to choose the versions. Click on next, and these are optional parameters. We can leave it and click on next. Click on save. Once we add this API from Exchange into API administration or API manager, then it is going to provide an API instance ID. If we see here, we have the API instance ID, and also there is the API status unregistered. Whenever we add a new API into the API administration, it will be with the status unregistered. Now we are going to use this API instance ID, and we are going to link this API instance ID to our API implementation. Go to Anypoint Studio, and from Anypoint Studio stop the application, go to global elements, and from here create a configuration for auto discovery. Choose our API auto discovery and then provide the API ID. We can copy this API ID from API administration from the Anypoint platform, and then we need to provide the flow name that it has to start. Select it as HBT suppliers API main flow. Click OK. And this API auto discovery, in generally we need to provide it as a dynamic parameter, because this API ID is different from environment to environment. So we have to read this as a dynamic property by externalizing the properties, and also we have to read this property from properties file .yaml files. As of now, I have hard coded the value. Click on OK. Now we also need to map the client ID and client secret of the environment in our Anypoint Studio. For that, go to Anypoint Studio, Preferences, and here we have Anypoint Studio. Within Anypoint Studio, go to API Manager and provide the client ID and client secret details here. We can go to Anypoint Platform, and within Anypoint Platform, open the Access Management. From Access Management, within HBT, go to Environments, go to Dev Environment. Here we have the client ID and client secret. Copy these details. Click on Validate. Now the organization is validated. Click on Apply and Apply Close. Now we will discuss about the policies. So here we have the API instance ID, and this API instance ID is mapped in our API implementation by using a auto discovery option. And also, to make sure this API ID is linked and applicable policies are loaded in our local environment, we have to map the environment client ID and client secret within the preferences in Anypoint Studio API Manager. Now go to Anypoint Platform, and within Anypoint Platform, go to Policies tab within the particular API. Here we are going to add a policy. So to add the policy, we have to select the policies here. And here we have different types of policies, like we have discussed security policies. So security policies are like we need to provide some username and password, or OAuth 2 authentication. So OAuth 2 authentication is kind of mechanism where we can provide the services by using a client ID and client secret, and also it is going to provide the access token, and that access token we are going to set some expiry time, and we will use that within the services. And JWT means JSON Web Token, and it is also one of the security policy. Likewise, we have other policies like IP allow list and block list. That means we can provide the IP addresses of the machines which can access this particular service by using IP allow list. And by using IP block list, we can restrict the IP addresses that they should not consume this service from particular IP addresses. And also there is JSON thread protection and XML thread protection. These are specifically used to prevent the huge payloads which are of unnecessary repeated elements within the JSON request, or it can be a XML request. So by using JSON or XML thread protection, we can make sure that we do not have huge payloads which are of unnecessary data. And we also have quality of services. So quality of services is like, for example, we are exposing our service and there is a peak time. So within peak time, we might be receiving multiple requests from multiple consumers. So whenever we receive too many requests at a time, there might be a chance we need to send that request to the target system, and the target system is not able to handle the request, and it might cause the crash of the particular server. So to prevent that, we are going to provide the quality of service by using the policies. So by using policies, we can make sure that we can prevent the number of requests that can be sent within the particular time frame. So for that purpose, we will use the rate limiting policies or spike control. So whenever there is a sudden increase in the request, then we can use the spike control to prevent the request. So by using HTTP caching, we can store the response of the particular service, and from the consumer, if we receive the same kind of request, we are going to service the response from a cache data instead of executing the entire flow or service. And there is compliance service. So compliance service is also used for providing a security, like by using client ID enforcement. We are going to make sure that we can provide a client ID and client secret which are already registered as applications, and we have to use the same client ID and client secret to send a request to the API. We also have cross-origin resource sharing. So in transformation, we have header injection policy. So by applying the header injection policy, we can add new headers to the service which are not part of the consumer request. And we have another policy, header removal. So for example, we are receiving 4 headers from the consumer request, but we don't need to send all the headers to the service that we have implemented. So in that case, we can use header removal, and we can remove the headers sent by consumer, and those headers will be not sent to the service that we have exposed. Troubleshooting. So troubleshooting, we can use the message logging. Now we are going to apply a rate limiting policy to the HPT suppliers API. Select the quality of service and select rate limiting. So by applying this policy, we are going to limit the number of requests that can be sent to the service within the time frame. And here, select the number of requests as 2 requests, and time period is 15 seconds. So within 15 seconds, only 2 requests can be sent to this API. And also check this expose headers option. By choosing this option, we can set the response headers with these properties or parameters. Click on apply. This policy is applied, and we need to deploy this application in order to apply the policies or load the policies. So as of now, we have this API ID which is unregistered. I am going to Anycon Studio and then deploy the application. Once the application is deployed, verify the logs. So here our application is deployed, and also along with the application, we can see that there is a policy rate limiting which is applied for this API. and we can see applied policy. And also there is a API ID which is registered as API instance ID. Now we are going to clear the logs from the console and we will test it from Postman. From Postman, send a request, and here we have sent one request, send one more request. We have sent two requests, send one more request, and we can see that there is an error, quota has been exceeded. Now we are going to verify the response headers. Go to headers, and within headers we can see that there are three parameters that are coming as the response headers. One is rate limiting remaining, that means how many requests are remaining, and also we have rate limit, that means the maximum number of requests that can be sent. And also we have one more parameter like rate limit reset. So within the next 7 seconds this rate limit will be reset and we can send a new request. And I am going to send one more request, and if I observe after 15 seconds we can send new request. But if we send any request more than 2 within that 15 seconds we are going to get an error like quota exceeded. In this way we can limit the number of requests, or we can apply policy that can control the number of requests that can be sent to the service. So this is applied for each and every method and service. So these two requests are sent for get request and we are getting a response timeout, and within the time frame we can even use the post request as well. API manager, refresh the page. So once the API is deployed with the API instance ID attached to it, then the API status within API administration will become active. I am going to stop the application, and now we are going to apply a new policy. For example, we have a multiple consumers, and for each consumer we need to set the different rate limit. At that point of time we have to define the SLA types. SLA types are nothing but service level access. For example, there is a premium consumer for our service, then we have to define the limit as 5 requests within 15 seconds, and there is a normal consumer, we want to set 2 requests per consumer within 15 seconds. Then we have to define the SLA types. Go to SLA types and here add a SLA type. Provide the name as silver, and we have to provide the approval type like automatic or manual. I am providing a manual, and then number of requests are 2 within 15 seconds. I am also going to add one more SLA type, gold. For gold, add the number of requests as 5 within 15 seconds. So we have two SLA types. Go to policies, and instead of applying rate limiting policy, remove this policy. So add a policy and go to quality of service and select the rate limiting SLA based policy and click next. Whenever we are going to apply the rate limiting SLA based policy, it needs to provide some identification, like we are defining the SLA types like silver and gold. That means we need some identification which is the gold consumer or which is a silver type of consumer. So to identify those things we have client ID and client secret which needs to be sent as part of the headers. We can define in different way also based on the type of IDs that we wanted to use. So we need to provide this client ID, client secret. In case it is a RTF, then it is not going to allow the underscores within the headers. So we have to provide the client ID and client secret as part of the headers while sending a request to this particular service. I am going to use expose headers, and we also have advanced options whether we want to apply this configuration and policy to all the API methods or resources, or if we want to apply for specific resources and methods, here you can use the list and you can match the resources. I am going to apply for all the methods and resources. Click on apply. And also, if we have not added the headers client ID and client secret, then we can get the API specification snippet from here. Go to the policy and use the API specification snippet. And from API specification snippet, based on the type of version, we can copy the code that we wanted to add. So you can add these traits as a client ID required and headers as client ID and client secret. Since we have already applied these client ID and client secret headers in our API, we don't need to reapply this. Now we are going to AnyPoint Exchange, and within AnyPoint Exchange, we are going to create applications for each of the SLA types. AnyPoint Exchange, select the asset or REST API, and here we have an option request access. Click on it and provide the API instance application. As of now, there are no applications, so create a new application. Provide the application name as test application and click on create. Here we need to choose the SLA tier. Click on silver, and whenever we are selecting the option, we can see that it is going to apply 2 requests within 15 seconds. Click on request access, close, and also create one more request access for gold. Select the API version, create one more application. This application, name it as developer application. Click on create, click on gold. So for developer application, we wanted to submit 5 requests within 15 seconds. That means we can allow 5 requests for the developer application. Now we have the applications created. Go back to assets list, and from here go to my applications. And within my applications, we can see that the applications created for test application and dev applications. Click on these applications, and from here we can copy the client ID and client secret details in order to send these details as part of the headers to the service. I am going to deploy the application, and then we will retest our API in local. Application is deployed, and also we can see that policy rate limiting SLA based is applied. Clear the console and send a request. So right now we are sending the same details, client ID and client secret. And now we are getting a invalid client ID or client secret details. Since we have applied a policy which needs to be sent with the valid credentials, it is throwing an error, invalid client ID and client secret. So to get this client ID and client secret, we can go to AnyPoint Exchange and copy these details. Click on show and save to clipboard. Send these details now. Even though we are sending the correct details, it is throwing an error, invalid client ID, client secret. We will go to AnyPoint API Manager and we will check the. From here, go to contracts, and within contracts, we can see that which applications are trying to access our API. What is the SLA tier for that application? And we can see that there is a dev app and also test app, and the status is pending for these applications. So click on approve. Click on approve for gold tier as well. Now go to Postman and send a request. Send one more time. Now, if we see, we are getting a supplier's details by sending the client ID and client secret. Let us try to change the value. Send a request. Whenever we are sending the wrong details, then we have received a 401 unauthorized error. So in order to secure our APIs by providing the valid credentials as part of the client ID or client secret or headers, we have applied a rate limiting SLA based to identify the SLA tier. Now we can send a request one more, and whenever the two requests are reached, then we are getting a quota exceeded error. I am going to use dev application client ID and client secret, and then we are going to send a new request. Copy these details. Send a request. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So whenever we are sending the sixth request, we can see that we have received quota exceeded. Since we are using the dev application client ID and client secret, this service or the supplier's API is allowing 5 requests within 15 seconds. And if we are sending more than 5 requests, then we are receiving a 429 too many request error, which is a quota exceeded error. So we are now segregating the consumer applications based on the level of access. That is by using or by creating a different applications and by creating a different client ID and client secret. In this way, we can manage the access. We can also apply client ID enforcement, and we will see how we can apply the client ID enforcement policy. Go to policies, and from policies remove the SLA rate limiting based policy. Remove policy and add a policy now. From policies, here we can search for a policy, which policy we wanted to apply. Use the client ID enforcement. So we can configure a client ID enforcement policy, which is a compliance service, to make sure that we are receiving the valid client ID and client secret details. So this can be provided either part of the headers or query parameters, that is up to the business or up to the API implementation that we are doing. And we are going to accept the parameters as part of headers, and we have a custom expression. Otherwise, if we want to add it as a basic authentication header, we can choose the HTTP basic authentication header. I am choosing custom expression and then click on apply. Stop the application and redeploy it. Application is deployed and applied with client ID enforcement mule policy. Go to Postman, send a request with dev client ID and client secret. Now we can see that we are able to send the request by using correct credentials. Since there is no rate limiting policy, we can able to send request based on the client ID and client secret and without the limit. And in our previous case, we have applied a rate limiting policy and also rate limiting SLA based policies, where we have defined the limit or number of requests that can be sent within the time frame. And client ID enforcement policy will be useful to make sure that we are sending a correct details as part of the headers, or maybe it can be as part of the query parameters as well. So if I am going to send a dummy value here, then I am getting an error like invalid client. Now we will deploy our application into Cloud Hub Runtime Manager from Anypoint Studio. So go to Anypoint Studio, stop the application. So we have stopped the application in local environment. So we can upload the jar file into Runtime Manager manually, or we can deploy the application by choosing a right click and also Anypoint platform, deploy to Cloud Hub. Here choose the environment, into which environment we wanted to deploy the application, and provide the application name. And here we have to select the runtime version and also worker size. So worker size is nothing but the RAM memory that we can assign to process the application. So if we want to increase the worker size, it will be like a vertical scaling. We are increasing the memory that can process the application. And if we wanted to increase the number of workers or number of instances for the application, then we have to increase the workers. So it is like a horizontal scaling. The number of instances we can add. Go to properties, and whenever we wanted to deploy the application into Cloud Hub by applying the policies or by linking the API instance ID, we have to provide the client ID and client secret of that environment. In that case, it will deploy successfully and we will not get any error. Otherwise, we won't be able to load the policies in the particular application for that particular environment. So provide these properties: client ID, client secret, base URI, and analytics base URI. If we are uploading the application manually, or if we are deploying the application from CI/CD pipelines, these properties must be configured when we are deploying the application. And click on deploy application. Now log into Anypoint platform, Runtime Manager, and select the environment. And here we can see that suppliers API is deployed. Open this one, and we will go to settings. So the settings that we have seen while deploying the application from Anypoint Studio, we can see that in the properties here. So these properties are mandatory in order to link the API ID in Runtime Manager. And here we can see our application is started, and also we will verify the policy. Here we can see that analytics policy is applied, and here we can see that client ID enforcement policy is also applied. Now we will test this application. Go to settings and click on the app URL. Copy this URL and go to Postman. From here, provide the resources API suppliers, and we need to provide the client ID and client secret of the application that we have registered. Send request, and we are getting a response. So these client ID and client secret are our test application client ID and client secret. We will test with development application client ID and client secret. Send a request. Since it is a client ID enforcement policy, there is no limit on the number of requests that we can submit. We'll make one change, like we don't want to allow the request from the developer application client credentials. Then we can go to Anypoint platform API management, and within API manager go to contracts, and from the contracts here we have option actions revoke. Click on revoke. So these permissions will be revoked for this developer application. Now refresh this page, go to Postman and send a new request with the developer credentials. Whenever we are sending the details, we can see that we are no more able to access the service or API with the developer application client details. In this way we can provide our security and we can manage the access for each client applications. We will just review what we have done in this session. So we have seen what are the policies and the types of policies, and we have also seen what are the contracts. So contracts are nothing but it is a application to communicate the service from consumer application. And we also seen SLA as service level access, and we have seen the auto discovery. By using auto discovery we can register the API, and that API ID we are going to link by using the auto discovery within our API implementation. And we also seen how we can apply the client ID enforcement, rate limiting policy and rate limiting SLA based policies. And also we have deployed our application into Cloud Hub Runtime Manager, and we have configured the properties that are needed to deploy the application successfully in Runtime Manager, and we can apply the policies. Thank you.